all the way from Germany. He's an attorney at law, and he represents Minespider. What a cool name. And he's going to talk about leveraging digital product passports. Volker, the stage, yeah, the stage is yours.
So, does this work? Yeah, it works. Yeah, maybe I can start already. As you hear already, I'm from Germany. Although our little startup is, we are all over the place in many countries because since Corona, our team, we gave them the chance to choose the place where they want to live and work, because we thought that when we are all at the same place and then Corona would hit us, then we are out of business immediately. So what we did, we developed a platform that helps companies to track supplies and their supply chains and their products and so on. We used these technologies to generate digital product passports. And this presentation today will be about leveraging digital product passports, in particular in the context of sustainability and also compliance of supply chains. But you can use it for any kind of setup where you want to share or collect information along multiple tiers of supply chains. I mean, you may use it also within a company if you have a big group, for example. But yeah, this is the standard use case that we talk about in general. So let's go ahead. We have a vision as a company, of course. We think that a world where tracked and responsible products are the norm rather than the exception. This is absolutely not the case yet, but we see that from a regulatory point of view, it's pushing companies in that direction for various reasons. What I can say is that compliance is a good reason to implement this, but there are many other reasons that may be even better, because you may get something out of that, why you do it, not only for compliance reasons. Compliance often means pain for people. And I think, there are many other reasons why you should do it. We had the luck that we, from the very beginning, got the chance and have been invited by very prominent companies to start with our journey and to test our ideas. One of our first customers was Volkswagen, for example, and because they had issues in their supply chains and they wanted to check if we could help them. And it was really interesting what you can learn about supply chains when you work in an environment that is in operation. So imagine that we as a startup, we started with something on paper. We had an idea, we wrote it down, we showed it to Volkswagen, and they said, exactly, this may solve a problem. Let's test it, let's check it, let's start, let's go ahead. Meanwhile, we work with multiple companies, with all sorts of companies. And one very important thing that I learned from the very beginning, I mean, you heard already that I have a legal background, and nevertheless, I work in the industry since, I think, 30 years now. But what was very astonishing for me that, maybe it's very obvious to many people, but for me, it was something very surprising to understand how diverse supply chains are. In this case of Volkswagen, but I think this is just representing any kind of supply chain. We saw that very prominent big brands are the big suppliers to companies like Volkswagen, which you think, yeah, with these volumes, this is obvious. But there were also very small companies, even individuals supplying to them. Maybe not directly, but indirectly. So what we as a startup had to consider always is, it's not only the big corporates with all kinds of IT professionals in it and compliance people in it and sustainability and banking and whatever involved, with big departments where you have always some experts that understand what you're doing. But you also have very small companies who have not the resources, not even to talk to you maybe. They just want to do what their customer needs and provide that as fast as possible and as easy as possible, without lots of implementation processes and testing and whatever. They just want to do it as easy as possible. So this already mentioned that you will learn today why implementing the digital product passports, the abbreviation is DPPs, can make sense. But also, I will tell a little bit about the challenges involved with that and how we as Minespider try to solve them or help solving them. That means what is the technology behind DPP, although I don't want to go too deep into it. First of all, I think although we are very proud about our tech, for the users it doesn't matter. It has to work, it has to do what is promised to do, and that's it. They often are not so much interested how it's done, but they want to see the results, and that's it. Of course, you can always ask me later or our tech team if you have technical questions in detail, but I think in this presentation I will just rush through it. And of course, I want to give some examples and best practices. So, in terms of challenges, first of all, supply chains are complex. So it's if you want to get information from your supply chains, it's something that is not an easy task. And because it's usually supply chains are global and they consist of very different components in very different industries, different regulatory frameworks, different countries, different peoples and mindsets. So yeah, it's complex. Also, people are not familiar with sharing information, or usually they are not familiar with sharing information along multiple tiers. I mean, they are often even reluctant to share information with their customers because they think it's their IP, it's their core, and why giving that away to someone? And often they may be right. I mean, there may be confidentiality aspects that, of course, have to be considered. And also, it's sometimes funny that it's that people think something is highly confidential while it's on their website and already published, or they think this is very important information now, but don't consider that the information maybe needed in 10 years, when it's absolutely outdated for producing a new product, but not outdated, absolutely not for those who recycle the old products or reuse or repair or refurbish or have a nice look at it. So it's something that people are not aware of, how important the information is along the full life cycle of a product. Also, they, in parallel, don't see their role and their position in the supply chain. They see it from their perspective now and today, and what they are doing today, and in the perspective to their direct customers and maybe their direct suppliers, but they usually don't consider the full picture, because in the past it was not so relevant. In the future, it will be more and more relevant. For example, when there's regulation saying that you have to have a certain percentage of recycled content, or that you have to demonstrate and be able to provide evidence for where your materials come from. If it's sourced from illegal environments, or when you want to import or export, there are lots of requirements that require local content, for example, and you have to evidence it. What we also see is that people think compliance is a burden, and yeah, I must admit, often it is, but that a lot of things come with compliance. For example, when you comply with the policies of your customers to supply to them, you do that because you want to sell to them. Now you have an audit from your customer, and then you have 3 customers, and everyone is auditing the same. So preparing a data set, like, for example, a digital product passport that has all the information at hand that usually auditors want to see, you prepare that once, and then this is out there forever. It can be used by anyone along the supply chain who is involved with this or who is affected by this. So it helps you preparing and distributing data along supply chains, although you don't not everyone is working on the same system. Not everyone wants to be connected to one's ERP system directly. So this is why the concept of passports as a tool that helps people to distribute information along supply chains can be really helpful. It's not something that is always helpful. There are many use cases where digital product passports may not make sense or not make sense yet, where databases may be or other setups may be more relevant or easier to implement. But in general, it's something that you can at least start to consider and check at which situation your information that you have at hand may be relevant in future, and then create these product passports, although you may not even distribute them at the very beginning, but later show them to those who need them, for example, the recyclers or refurbishers and so on. So what else? What I also think that when you want to change a setup, this is usually something that is hard to do. It's extra efforts. It's something that people are reluctant to do. And often they are right. Why should I change something when it's working? Usually it's seen on a short period that, okay, everything is now compliant, everything is fine, I do what I need to do. Why should I prepare anything for the future? We see that especially, for example, when from a regulatory point of view, lawmakers say, okay, you have to provide digital product passports in 2027. Then most companies say, okay, that's a problem for 2027 and not for now. So why starting now? Being ahead of something and being someone who is starting early can have the effect that already you start identifying those who have the same mindset, who want to support you, who see that there's something coming up in the future. Let's prepare now. Let's be the first ones, team up with this. And while people understand, oh, there are a few suppliers in my supply chain or a few off-takers that are ahead of their market, that look forward, that understand what the things that are going on in their environments, that this is something that they suddenly realize, oh, we are in an environment of very valuable people in our supply chains, maybe not directly, but indirectly connected with them. And this is really important to survive in an environment that is usually tough, that is competition, that is hard, where everyone wants to have the biggest share and get everyone else out. And this is something, usually a mindset that we often see, that people think, oh, they are all competitors everywhere, instead of understanding, oh, there are a lot of people that maybe help me with what I want to achieve. We want to be the best, but not alone, but together, and improve things, make things better. And I'm not alone here. I'm in the middle of a supply chain of different elements in a product, so we need to work together. And to understand that, this is what we realize when we implement our products, that often this is the biggest effect, that people are very surprised of how massive this is to establish a stronger relationship up and downstream the supply chains. So, what I also wanted to mention is that ESG, environmental and social and governance, is of course a very important thing, and also it's highly relevant and it's challenging. On the other hand, what's usually more important for the companies, individual companies, is that no one wants to be surprised by what's in their supply chains. They don't want to be interrupted in their supplies. They don't want to have any dubious sources in their supply chains and suddenly get knocked out because of import bans or sales bans or whatever. So ESG for many seems to be nice to have, but sourcing and getting the right supplies and the right suppliers in their supply chains is a higher, or seems to be more important for many companies. In terms of the benefits of implementing DPPs, I mentioned already several things. First of all, it's the circularity and sustainability, which is important and becomes more and more important. For example, carbon footprint reduction is a very important thing. And when you want to reduce your carbon footprint, you start, of course, with your company, with your immediate environment, where you have impact and where you can change things. But usually you learn quite quickly, quite fast, that it's more about the suppliers in your supply chain, the raw materials in it, the smelting processes, and wherever energy is consumed, that you can't control because you're in the middle of the supply chain. And then you want to understand how this works and who is in your supply chain, and even at best get a closed loop with the best suppliers that meet all the requirements, in particular in terms of sustainability, but also in terms of legal compliance, regulatory compliance, market access, and so on. What is also very important is visibility. you gain a lot of visibility when you team up with companies that also work with the same goals, that have the same interests. And when you create these product passports, even if you're a very small player in the supply chains, you may think you are a very small player, but often it's the difference. You are a very important player because you do things in the way that is expected by your customers, and not only by your direct customers, but also by all those that later show up downstream in your supply chain or upstream. This brings us to supply chain management. This is also becoming more and more important. Supply chains usually get managed, and people try to manage them. It's hard. The more information you get, and in particular when you can trace things, this is something that can help you to mitigate risk and to optimize cost and to improve not only your products but the whole life cycle of a product. So as I said, we developed tools, mainly software tools, but also services around these tools. And when you see this is a simplified model of a supply chain, it usually starts with primary raw materials that go to refiners, and then it gets introduced into products. For example, if this is a use case of a battery, it's cell components and cell manufacturers, and then we have the module and battery manufacturers. Then it gets to the automotive industry and directly into the OEMs. Then we have the users. Then we have the second life and maybe third life, and finally the recycling process. And then we have secondary raw materials, and some of that may go to refiners again. And in every step, at every phase, a product passport can make sense. Because everywhere is information involved. And for example, when you see the last two steps, the results and the efficiency of recycling completely depends on the input. And if you want to have a streamlined output, a very homogeneous output, then the better the information is you get from the material that gets in, the better the output can be. And you can design it accordingly. So the refining process at the very beginning and the raw material sources are already very important to understand, for example, chemical compositions of materials, and later design your further processes on top of that. I mentioned already that we work with different companies in different phases and along the full life cycle. What we see that we have to, I mentioned already, we have to adopt to the different situations. For example, we see highly sophisticated manufacturers with all kinds of software environments and experts involved, and with the same tool, we work in Liberia, in the middle of nowhere, in a bush, where people just dig raw materials out of the ground in the ASM business, for example. These people are not interested at all in compliance in Europe, because they are not the ones who sell to Europe. It's the traders later who sell to Europe. They have a completely different regulatory setup. It's only those in Europe who are subject to certain laws or who want to have certain products because they are in need for certain raw materials, who are interested in what this miner is doing. Telling them, you should make a big data sheet and generate a product passport and create all of data sets, they will sell a gram more when they do that. They may even not get a better price for it, because they just sell it for the price to the trader, and they get the price that the trader is willing to pay. So why should they use any kind of tool? It's only because we want them to do that, or we would like them to do that, so we have to convince them. One thing is, for example, it turns out that many traders cheat their ASM suppliers with scales that are not calibrated, for example, or not working correctly. So what we implemented and try to test now is using technical tools like IoT devices and so on that work with chips, for example, that you give to the people who use these scales. They, whenever they put something on the scale, they put their chips, their RFID chips on the scale, and then automatically data is sent to our platform that later can show and demonstrate to the off-takers this was sourced at this area by these people, and the environment is not in an illegal environment, it's in a legal setup. They have a license and so on. Because we got this information from other sources, maybe, for example. So we try to simplify the process and, for example, use tools that people have at hand. They have a mobile phone. They don't work with a laptop. They have a mobile phone. They may not even have a data or a stable connection. So we develop tools that only share information when there's when the mobile phone gets in an environment where there is a network, where they can send the information. But it's already hashed and stored and encrypted on the phone when the data is generated. So we can be assured that it can't be modified anymore. It has a timestamp, it has the assignment of specific other information and data set that later help us to understand who was the person that used the scale at this time. So this is just an example to show, although we are working with a lot of tech, we try to make it as simple as possible to implement that. And I'm pretty sure and I'm confident that when you can implement it in the middle of nowhere, anywhere in the world, in the bush in Liberia, then you should be able to do the same thing in a big factory in Germany, for example. Although sometimes it seems to be harder to do that here in Germany than in Norway or wherever. Because, yeah, it's also a mindset question sometimes. Our platform, I mean, as I said already, this platform allows to generate and create product passports that can track any kind of information and help to collect any kind of information. So you can use that to push and to pull data. You can collect data from your suppliers, for example, but also you can create this and use these product passports that they can later be linked along the supply chain. It's data agnostic, so you can make use of any kind of data. You can implement any kind of data. We have different ways to process the data. In the end, what's important to understand is, I mean, it's blockchain based, and we use the blockchain technology only to make sure that we can understand when data has been modified or if data has been touched later, and understand that this can only be done in a way that this always is made transparent. So we may not be able to get access to the information because it's encrypted, but by connecting encryption data and hash codes that are linked along the supply chain, we can see when something has been modified. Like, for example, let's say you have an audit report and anyone could Photoshop that. At the moment, it's the case that when you get a PDF, for example, me as a lawyer, I can get a nice PDF and I can see it and I think, oh, it looks nice. All stamps are on it, or everything signs, the data the date is correct, and so on. But I can't see if this has been modified beforehand, and I can't see who has introduced this PDF first. With blockchain, you can, at least once it's in the system, you can recognize if something has been modified without opening the file, just by comparing hash codes. And this is already very helpful. Although many people ask me, okay, but what is with the data when it comes in? It can be wrong data. And we are not the auditors. We don't want to audit the information. This is something where experts can do audits, but it's not Minespider. But at least you can evidence that the data, once it's in the system, it's in there. It's encrypted. No one can read it unless you authorize people to read it. But you can understand who put it on the system. And then you start your audits there at the very beginning. You don't have to check the whole trail and ask everyone, did you change it? Or you, or you, or you? Who was it? So you reduce the effort to check information to one single point. And what I mentioned at the very beginning, when there are companies who have lots of audits in parallel from lots of customers, because everyone wants to check everything in detail, it can be helpful that they collect the information, even the audit reports of someone. And if everyone else thinks, yeah, this auditor is fine, I accept it, until I think, no, I don't trust him anymore, then I can double check things. But what we have to understand in supply chains, it's often the case that you may want to check everything, but it's a big effort to check everything and check it twice and 3 times and so on. So focus on the most important things to check. And this can be very different for the different people in the supply chain. For some people, a ton may be a big volume, so I check that. For others, a ton is almost nothing because they get 300 tons a day. So what is the important supply that needs to be checked and audited? Where to focus on? This is something that you can decide even later because the data is there, will not change. You can later check it, later dive into it when you think it's relevant for your supply chain. For example, because you identify an auditor that has been that turned out to be corrupt, and then you think, okay, now I want to know in which supply chain this auditor has been involved, and then you dive into that, but not in everything. So you help getting things more efficient. This you can do for any kind of product along any kind of supply chain. As I mentioned already, we are data agnostic. So in the end, it's about creating digital IDs with digital data sets, and they can be adapted to any kind of environment. We have different layers of data. That means you can assign information in a way that you can say, okay, this can be public, anyone can see it, or this is a data set that should be seen only by people in the same supply chain, or some information may only be visible to your direct customer. And so we have different levels of transparency, how we call it. We have a templating system. This helps us to adapt to any scenario, any kind of regulatory setup. For example, in the battery industry, there is specific, in the automotive industry, there are specific standards or legal requirements or industry practices that ask for specific information. So we have templates for that. Then there is the construction industry, for example, that has different data requirements, although they also build on the same raw material. So, for example, copper may end up in the automotive industry, but it may also later end up in the building and construction industry or in healthcare or wherever. So this is something that you always have to or that we try to consider to be very adaptive to different global and local and industry scenarios and be open for anything, so that people later can add any kind of data set or structure or ask for different information and design their templates and use them according to their individual needs. Yeah, what I already said is usually people benefit from these because with these product passport, then they can increase not only the brand value, but also the value of the product that they sell or that they buy. They also can use this for access to markets. For example, when you see that the European market will be fenced by carbon border adjustment mechanisms, where the European Commission and the European Union wants to make sure that competitive advantages of those who use coal and oil when they produce things, when they are cheap, may not be, or that European companies may not be able to compete with that when they have to be pay more expensive green energy. So this is why you have to prove when you want to import something what kind of if this carbon border mechanism applies to you, and then of course prove if this is compliant or not with your products. So in the end, these product passports can help you to get access to a market like a normal passport helps you to get access to a country when you travel, for example. And it, of course, this is something that we see very often. It helps you to distinguish your products from others because you already have the information and provide the information with the product to your customers, not only direct customers, but also to every customer's customer and so on. So this is something that we see that is usually the easiest way to convince people because they think marketing is everything and seems to be more important sometimes than compliance, although they are compliant, but to promote their products, to show them where they are, the marketing element is quite important for many companies. Yeah, just one example where I wanted to show that, and that is very, where you can easily understand what it means to collect and share information along a supply chain is the carbon scope 3 calculations. It's quite hard to do that. There are all kinds of standards already, but they are sometimes quite vague. and it's not easy to get that done. We see that there's lots of questions when you have to do it in practice. But what we also see is when people start doing that and identify the biggest energy or carbon relevant elements in their products and the supplies associated to that, whenever there's someone who's already working on that front, this is highly welcome. Not only because of the primary data that they send to demonstrate the carbon footprint, maybe they did already carbon calculation and so on, but also you see that they have the same goal, to reduce the carbon footprint. And reducing a carbon footprint usually means you have a little bit of, or you have costs at the very beginning, but in the end you are more efficient because you save energy. And energy means work, and work is something, the less work you have with the same output, the better it is. So that means when you see that people are trying to reduce their carbon footprint, they try to be more efficient. And to understand who in your supply chain is doing that is very important. Also, people can understand that, or easily understand that when one party upstream is doing a big effort in carbon reduction, that everyone else along the full supply chain, even along the full life cycle, will benefit from that because it helps reducing everyone's carbon footprint. So the impact of these efforts and showing that not only to your direct customer who's buying your product, but to everyone along the supply chain, this is something that is more and more relevant and seen by customers. So you see here, this is a very simplified model, but when, for example, in the mine, when they start to change the trucks, we had a project, we had been in lots of discussions with the mining industries where they told us we will never change these big trucks from gasoline to electrify them because it seems to be inefficient. And later it turned out when they electrified them, it was possible, it turned out to be possible. They saved a lot of time because they didn't have to spend a lot of time at the filling stations, and the cars could just drive all the time. They just took a forklifter to take out the big battery systems, and within a few seconds or a minute, they just changed it, and then the truck could roll on. So this piles up. And this was something where everyone, for example, was very astonished that electrifying these big trucks can have a big impact. And suddenly, every one of their customers said, oh man, what did you do there? You save a lot of gas. And gas is one of the things, or gasoline is one of the things that has an impact on your product. I'm running out of time, I think. Am I already over the time, or? Just one thing, we did an open battery passport. This is something for free for the battery industry. And we try to really help people to start things. And this is one important thing to understand. We start with the low-hanging fruits. Today we learned a lot about complexity of data, and this is really the most hindering thing. What we try to do is start very simple and then go from there. And this is usually the easiest way to get into it. This is also very interesting. We saw when we work since several years with Minsur, and suddenly they decided to make a press release, years after we already started with this. And suddenly their stock, from the day when we did announce the partnership, their market cap rose. I mean, this is really astonishing because, I mean, they do that for years already, but promoting it suddenly had this big impact. So this already shows what it means to do something in transparency. We are also involved in various projects. I'll just go through them quite fast. So this is about helping people to train people on product passports. We do that in the processing industry. This one is about sourcing raw materials with IoT devices. This one is about implementing data management or first of all, this project is about reuse and repair and recycling of EV batteries. But we as Minespider, we are responsible for the full data management along the full supply chain and implementing the product passports. This Recirculate is another project which is pretty much close to what Betrol is about. It's also about recycling and reuse and remanufacturing batteries for the EV industry. And on top of that, we built a marketplace around that. So this is something where we see that and where we want to test and challenge if marketplaces for these product passport-backed raw materials and components and batteries and used batteries have an advantage and can attract customers. Apollo is the same, but in the PV industry. So you see, we are not only in automotive, but also you can implement our products anywhere in any industry, and this one was very close. So yeah, there are other projects, but this is it for now. And sorry for my taking more time from yours than planned, but I hope it's okay. No questions?
In the back. How do you deal with missing or uncertain data? Do you provide error bars?
Yeah, so there are all kinds of gaps in the data. This is a typical problem. First of all, we start with what we can get. I mentioned already these low-hanging fruits. And then we go from there. If people need more data, and if there's a good reason to collect this data, then they just do it. If there's not a good reason, if people can't be convinced why more data is needed, or why data needs to be more precise or whatever, then, I mean, yeah, this is something that the people involved has to decide. It's not Minespider. We can use any kind of data and connect that. The QR code is just to identify the data passport. You can put that on the product, of course. You can have a stamp or a sticker or laser it in, but you can also add that to any kind of document or website or PDF or invoice or whatever. So this is quite flexible. And you can later add data to the passport, so it can always be updated.
Our physical passport have more or less similar information from whichever country you come from. But when it comes to digital product passport, which you are building or maybe other vendors are building, is there a standard which is established at the EU or at the world level? Or
yeah,
will it be different?
It will be different, that's for sure. And we will not be the only ones who's providing the software. We will not rule the world with this. This is what companies hate. They don't want to be locked into one system. The European Commission doesn't want to do that, and they are aware it's a complex task. What we see is there are all kinds of standards developing and popping up industry-wise. So the automotive industry is doing something, and there's some regulatory elements which describes a little bit how it should look like. And then there are other industries that do that. There's the Eco-Design Directive that is pushing hard for product passports, but this is just a European perspective. Then you have Asia. We see that a lot of Asian companies are calling us and asking, what's up, what can we do? Can we use it already? We want to import to Europe. We thought that our product is mainly interesting now for European companies, but it seems to be that the Asian companies are even more interested in that because they want to get into this market. And what data is needed today can be very different what is needed in 5 years. Also, the reluctancy to share information can change over time. So we will see how this develops. But we are open for any kind of model or concept or regulation or industry standard or company standard.
Okay. Volker Krümpel.
Thank you.